But before we go on, why don't you hit Control Q, and that's going to take you up to that quick launch bar, and type ASP.NET. Now, I'm not going to have you go through this entire thing, but you'll see there that there is some initial workload stuff. So if you click on that, then the installer is going to open back up. Now, we don't need to do that right now. I will warn you that it's not a smooth feeling experience, because the first thing the installer insists you do is close all versions of Visual Studio, which feels weird when you say, okay, I was in Visual Studio, now you want me to close it. So I can't say this is like a primary way, but if there's something that you want to know, whether it's installed, UWP or whatever, if you just come up here and type it, it's going to tell you, how you're doing with that. So
awesome.
Yeah. So since we had ASP.NET up, there's one more thing I want to say right now, and that is that I want to just mention where we're at in this big arc of where .NET is going, so people they're not disappointed in what's actually in the box in Visual Studio 2017. So we're on our way to the full new ASP.NET Core, .NET Core world. But our current path to .NET Core doesn't have it completely fleshed out yet. So recently, there's been something called .NET Standard that's come in to describe what the whole base new .NET framework is going to look like. And it's like a description. You can think of it as logically as kind of an interface, although it's implemented differently than that. So as we step into that, we're not there yet. We don't have .NET Core 2.0 in Visual Studio 2017. The roadmap puts that on Q2 or Q3 of this year. I think it's Q3 is when we're looking at a final release on that. In the meantime, and this is kind of confusing because we have .NET Core, and then we have ASP.NET Core, and they are different things. ASP.NET Core can run against the new .NET Core or the existing full .NET framework, which is now in 4.62 or 4.61 version.
Did not know that.
Okay, so ASP.NET Core can work against either of those. So the current ASP.NET Core has pretty good tooling. We're at ASP.NET Core 1.1 in the Visual Studio 2017. I believe I've got that number right. There's just so many numbers to keep track of that sometimes I get them a little mixed up. But you can work with ASP.NET Core right now today against the full .NET framework and have a rich environment. If you go against .NET Core right now in the .NET Core 1.1, you may feel like you're missing some features that are important to you.
And the trade-off there, if you build, and I'm asking, I'm not telling, but if you build an ASP.NET Core application against .NET 4, let's say, you don't have the option to port that over to like another platform.
That's correct. You can't go to Linux with that, but what you could do is you can target in all your libraries, everything beyond ASP.NET Core, you can target .NET Standard. And then right now, you can run that against the full .NET framework, and it'll use a subset of that that makes sense going forward. And then you can move to .NET Core when that becomes available with minimum pain. So that's a really important scenario for people that are trying to figure out how to be effective today and ready for tomorrow. If you're out there and you want to be out there on the front, really look into .NET Standard, which one of the things that we can do with that is we can take a look at there's an article that Scott Hanselman put out. Let me show you this. And here's, this is an article by Scott Hanselman. Let me get the top of that up there. And so it's entitled What .NET Developers Ought to Know to Start 2017. And it's a great article that explains more about what .NET Standard is. This is a really tough concept. He's got a graphic here that helps explain why Microsoft cares, which is that Microsoft's able to combine a lot of binaries. And it keeps them, I mean, at one point they were developing 7 versions of the .NET framework, and that kind of had to stop. But for us, we can do the same thing. We can write libraries that can be shared across all these really different scenarios, and that's what .NET Standard's all about.
Yeah, and that's, so a couple of thoughts that percolated up in my brain while you were talking about that. It's like that notion of being able to target a portable layer reminds me a lot of like what we used to do with Silverlight.
Yes, right? And it's trying to do that, but forget Silverlight because it's not on the picture.
It's gone.
Right.
Like I remember, I'm going to date myself here, but I remember back when .NET was just being talked about, right? And it was a thing, and there were, you could get like beta versions of it, and all of the things that they were talking about now with .NET Standard, they were talking about those kind of same qualities inside of the .NET framework of being able to target a specific framework and then just have it in theory run on, you know, what they called Rotor, which was the Berkeley Unix version of .NET. So how is .NET Standard a new? Is that just another iteration of we got to get back on a common ground, or?
I think there's a couple of things that are different there. One of which is it goes against the concept of real binaries and some binary compatibility stuff. So there's some stuff that they're able to do magic under the hood that I don't understand, to tell you the truth. Okay. Yeah. And the second thing is it's set up to be very granular. So there's bits and it's small pieces instead of the one giant runtime that used to be the .NET you know, full framework running on these other things. And then it never really took off. There is no .NET framework that was really successful. Miguel de Caso and the Mono project was as close as we ever got, and really that wasn't very far. So, and even Miguel, when he sat down to say, what do I do with this? He said, I build Xamarin, not I make Mono great. So I think it was really in need of a reboot on every platform. So I'll show you one more thing here, and then let's jump in. We're talking too much, and we're not seeing enough code yet. Okay. So let's do that. This is a poster that's come up recently, and let me just. A little small. It looks a little small, doesn't it? Let's make that big. So you can come into some part of this. It's a poster, and you'll just want to come to different portions of that to see the. You know, see different things. Well, but if you want a quick overview of what's actually coming here in Visual Studio 2017, this just gives little hints at some of the stuff we're going to be talking about today. I'm not exactly sure who put that together, but it's out on the Microsoft properties, and so you can take a look at that.
Very nice.
All right?
Yes, that looks awesome, and that looks very helpful. I love infographics. So that infographic was very interesting. I'm now looking at the project that we opened, and it's telling me that it's unavailable. Yeah,
it looks like I forgot to have you install something. So what happens when you click on that?
Well, if I right-click on it, sometimes, well, so usually when that doesn't appear, it's because of some, like, the file's blocked or it can't read it or something.
Right, right. There's something wrong on that particular project. I think in this case, I just didn't have you install something that you needed. So install missing features. All right, let's
see what happens.
So we get there.
All right, so look, this is kind of cool actually that it's telling me it'll actually do the thing it needs to do to get my project up and running.
Now it might tell you that you need to close Visual Studio.
That's okay.
Okay, so let's go ahead and close Visual Studio in the background because it's not happy trying to do both. Okay, so it's my mistake not having you install that. It looks like it's checked right now, so let's just go, okay?
Yep.
And this is going to take a couple of minutes. So let me talk a bit about the arc of where we're at in the history.
Sure.
And so we're trying to get to this .NET Standard, .NET Core version in the future, where we're going to have a whole new framework that's written from the ground up, and it goes on Linux, and it does all this exciting stuff. Yep. So that's going to be .NET Core 2.0, which is not out till the fall. Okay, we don't have it right now in the box. So I just want to make sure people don't, come into this and say, oh, I wanted to do the new stuff, and I'm not going to be able to do that because it's not in this part right here.
Presumably, when that is ready, it will just be another one of these little, like, workflows.
And it's actually, it's a workflow now, but it's a workflow for 1.1 instead of, and also .NET Standard is one of the ways that you can get to that, and that'll be available here. So
that's pretty cool. Yeah. But that kind of distribution. So it's like Microsoft. So they've always distributed stuff like through the gallery, right? You can install extensions that way. But it seems like they've broken down a lot of the guts of Visual Studio into something very similar.
They have. And so you're going to see NuGet delivery, which you're used to NuGet delivery on like side things, like not the core stuff. So you're going to see pieces of diagnostics. You're going to see pieces of things that are not required for everybody, that everybody isn't going to have to pick up that thing and use it. So you're going to see those delivered via NuGet instead of being installed via the core package. If it's not something you're going to need, then you may wind up having to bring that down via NuGet. Extensions, we're going to see some of that as well, which is why you're going to see extension suggestions sometimes inside Visual Studio now, because there's pieces like the way that I believe that the way that you edit project files now, and the coloration and the other IntelliSense support you get there, I believe that comes down as a Visual Studio extension. So you're going to see that. You're also going to see that when you get new features coming out that are in between the different releases. Microsoft has a real challenge on how often to deliver Visual Studio. Because there's some people it's like every day.
Yeah.
Not really. That's too often.
I wouldn't want it every day.
But you know, there's different people want different levels of investment there, and some people just wait until it's all completely ready, and some are not. Some are looking to do it in bigger, bigger chunks less often.
Yeah.
So trying to figure out the path through that. Microsoft's got something called trains, support trains.
Mm-hmm.
Trains, isn't that funny? It's
like
little
a choo-choo?
Choo-choo.
Choo-choo. Okay.
Yeah, yeah. So there's two support trains.
Mm-hmm.
One is called the LTS train, or the long-term support train, and the other is called FTS, which is the fast track support train. And this is stuff they announced about 4 or 5 months ago, and it's kind of confusing. But I think you want to make sure you're on the right track, because if you're on the long-term support track, you can jump onto the fast track. But if you jump onto the fast track, you can't get back to the long-term track until the next crossover point, which is a main release. Now, I don't know quite how that's going to work for the first year or two into .NET, .NET Core, .NET Standard, all of that, to see how smooth that whole process goes. There might be some interim releases that they really need everybody to be on, such as .NET Core 1.2 or 1.3. So I don't quite know how that's going to go, but honestly, I think if you want LTS, probably don't want to be on a .NET Core right now. You probably want to wait till 2.0.
That sounds about right.
The standard you can go to, because the standard is just this definition, this overarching thing that we want to take a look at.
Nice. Looks like we're almost done here.
Okay.
So just while we're waiting, I always like to pick your brain about this. What extensions are you using every day right now in Visual Studio?
I actually don't use very many extensions. If I'm using T4, I'm always have a T4 extension for coloration in that. And you can get to coloration. The infographics I showed so that there's 20 other languages. It lists like 6, including Ruby and PHP, and then it's got 20 others. Yeah. So there's a standard way that you define the pieces of a language. I can't think of what the name of that is, but it's a standard that different editors can use.
Yeah. No,
and it ties into that. So there's a bunch of different coloration possibilities that you can do there.
Oh, that's cool.
Yeah, which is
really cool.
Pretty cool. Looks like we're almost done.
It's finishing
we're at 100%. Yeah. We'll have to restart Visual Studio and get that project back up.
Absolutely. So one of the things I wanted to mention, and this is the thing that popped out of my head earlier, I got to reboot.
Really?
It says, that's what it says. That's what it says.
Bummer. All right.
We'll be right back.
Well, in fairness, we didn't have to reboot when we did the original installation.
Truth.